Okay, so I talked a little bit about the components of the game and kind of some of the design philosophy, which I'm happy to talk about at length with anybody who cares. I was going to talk real quick about some of the unit types that are featured here. These unit types are generic. It's designed that way specifically so that I have capabilities of specific units that are employed in certain battles, but from one battle to the next, the units have the same capabilities, and the differences in each scenario and each battle are more based on who the leaders are, the different mix of forces and things, as opposed to an actual, like one cavalry unit is going to be the same from one battle to the next. And that's a little bit of an abstraction, but I think it's suitable, and again, it sort of heightens playability and allowed me to get one set of counters that allowed me to do 11 scenarios. So we'll start very simply and look at spearmen. These are just your typical spearmen, professional spear they're called. Spear units, and there are others, and we'll talk about them, have a side where they are what we call formed. That's sort of like in a shield wall. And then on the back, you can see that their shield has kind of disappeared and some of their ratings have changed. And now they're in open formation, and this means they've sort of fallen apart. Spearmen are sort of your generic unit in the game. Being able to form a shield wall is a big advantage for them. And they're not super fast, but they're very stolid and capable. And this is sort of the backbone of most of your armies. Also in the spear unit class, we have churls. These are a feature only of some of the later Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. You see they only have one spear, and their ratings are a little bit different. Again, they have a shield side, which means that they are formed, and then a side here where they're in open formation. And again, when they change to open formation, which can either be done voluntarily or as a result of some combat effects, that reduces their capability in some ways, although it does make them faster, and it does allow them to engage in heroic combat if you want to. Cavalry is one of the most important pieces of the game, and one of the things that I was really trying to capture in the design, which was the role of cavalry in this era. Mostly a feature of the British kingdoms. They are very mobile. You can see they have a 6-4 movement as opposed to formed spear units, which have a 3. And this means that they can actually move in the movement phase and later in the what we call the mounted reaction phase, or the reaction phase, which allows them a lot more mobility. But they don't fight as well because they're typically smaller, maybe not as heavily armed, but they also have the benefit of being able to use javelins. And again, this is based on research that shows that this is how they fought. They were very mobile and attacked people with javelins. And then if they found an opportunity to attack somebody in close combat, then they would do so. But they were sort of opportunistic in that fashion. They're not line troops. They're not going to have your crashing, heavily armored cavalry charges. And if you try to stick them to plug gaps in the line and use them as just an addition of your shield wall, they're going to get killed. We have barbarians. Barbarian units are usually represent the early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. You can see that they have a high combat factor there of a 6. Their defense factor is 4. They also don't. They're not allowed to stack, so they tend to fall apart rather quickly if they're not used appropriately. You have to be very careful with them because they have a big attack factor, so they can do a lot of damage. But if somebody gets around them or if they get counterattacked, they tend to fall apart, so they can be a little bit fragile. Heroic units, we have several types. These are actually, first off is the comitatus units. Foot comitatus units are just spear units, but they represent the actual bodyguard of the king. They're foot units. You can see that their morale value here, the 6, is highlighted in yellow, which means they're a heroic unit, which gives them some benefits. They can attack independently without a leader present and whatnot. And they also have higher values typically. They also will not rout. They can only be killed in close combat or by sacrificing them to save a leader. And on the back again, they can be open or formed because this is technically a spear unit. But you'll see that they have a sword icon on there, which means that they're heroic. That's another just a mnemonic for the fact that they're heroic, because heroes tended to have swords available, whereas everybody else just had spears. Same is true of barbarian comitatus units. Again, it's a foot unit, slightly higher values. They're also heroic. On the back, they can be shaken. They can't form a shield wall because they're barbarians. And you'll see that the same is true for cavalry units. Going back to them on the other side, they're marked shaken. For spear units, since they don't have that mark on the back as they're open or formed, we have shaken markers to actually denote that. And then everybody gets a disrupted if they take another hit. And we'll talk about that later. Finally, you have the mounted comitatus units. Pretty good values, also very quick. They can use javelin attacks, and they don't rout. They have the same capabilities as a foot comitatus or as a barbarian comitatus, but they have different values, and they move a little bit more quickly. So they have, the advantages of a cavalry unit and the disadvantages of a cavalry unit with the advantages of a comitatus unit. Heroes, I'll show you quick examples of those. Here's a mounted hero. Same, again, you see that he's got the mounted movement value. And then here you have a foot hero. These heroes, they don't do shield wall or anything. They're just individuals, so they can't form a shield wall. They have typically pretty good values, and their attack and defense values, which are here, are underlined to show that they're actually doubled in heroic combat. So if they move into the same hex with somebody in attack, they're doubled to a 4 instead of a 2, which makes them, 2 is not very good, but a 4 is actually pretty decent. And then finally, for the unit types, we'll look at leaders. I've chosen Prydain McGabran, who is a real icon of the era for one of the later scenarios. He has a 2 here, you'll see, and that's his leader value. That makes him, that's a leadership range, which means that he can influence units out to 2 hexes. That's because, he's a leader. He has big battlefield presence. Probably also has people underneath him, leaders, sergeants, maybe a big horn that he's using to contact people that other leaders that with a lower value of 1 might not have. And then you'll actually see that heroes, which I didn't mention, all heroes have a 0, which means that they affect, as a leader, units in their own hex. So even though they can't reach out like Prydain and reach people 2 hexes away, they can influence people in the same hex. So that gives them another benefit. And heroes only come about as a result of heroic combat. They don't start the game in the order of battle. They come in as a result of combat. So you want to generate them again by initiating heroic combats and rolling well, and then you can have extra leaders come in and help your side out. All right, we'll talk about some of the elements of combat in a later video. Thanks for listening.